Welcome everyone to a very exciting webinar today featuring our OpenSci Executive Director Noam Ross on publishing, promoting, and peer reviewing our packages. Before we get started, I do want to flag a number of features for the members of our audience. We intend to make this a very casual, relaxed, and interactive session. So if there's anything that comes to mind, a question or a thought that you want to share, feel free to use the Q&A feature that's built into our Zoom webinar. Zach and I will be monitoring the Q&A, and so we can flag, grab Noam's attention if there's anything that needs to be answered on the spot. But if there is also something that you would like to say out loud or share, we absolutely welcome discussion. So just raise hand. That's one of the features in the Zoom. So you can see I've initiated it, and that will grab our attention to unmute you and allow this free-flowing discussion. So we absolutely welcome all participation. Before getting started on the actual content of this webinar, I first want to introduce open source at Stanford, because there are a number of people in the audience who are engaging with our open source projects office, or OSPO, OSPO. You might hear me say that at times. And so letting you know that this is just one of the many programs that we offer to really support you and the development of open source software within the research ecosystem. So open source at Stanford is part of the Stanford Data Science Center for Open and Reproducible Science. So as much as we are rooted in open source software, we are also coming from principles of open science. We are led by Professor Russ Poldrak, who is our faculty director, and Zach Chandler is the executive director of open source at Stanford. Thank you for waving, and one of the panelists today. Currently, we're a community of PhD students, postdocs, research staff, faculty, but this is growing. We're engaging with external scientific communities and external communities in the development of open source software, so our OpenSci being one of those communities. What we're up to right now, and of course, if any of this sounds relevant to your research or interesting to you, we highly encourage you to reach out to us after this event. We maintain a projects registry. This is available on our website, and it is essentially a catalog of notable open source projects at Stanford. Of course, the word notable is up for interpretation, and we really turn that to you and asking you what you deem is a notable project in open source software for research. We run a maintainers and contributors roundtable. This is made up of coding leads from these various projects, and so it is first and foremost a community designed for collaboration and learning. If you are currently a coding lead maintaining an open source software project and are not part of this maintainers and contributors roundtable, but would like to be part of a community with other people in similar roles, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to invite you to our next meeting. Meetings run once a month, and for those of you who are on campus in person, we provide lunch. Open source at Stanford also provides consultations on a project basis or an individual basis. We, once a year, award two prize types. First, a project prize, the Open Source Software Prize. This is for exemplary projects that have demonstrated open source best practices, academic, and broader societal impact. And we also offer the Open Source at Stanford Community Prize, which is awarded to individuals who have been very engaged, generous, and thoughtful about the open source community that we have created here at Stanford. And the last thing that I want to highlight is we have made a significant attempt this past academic year to scale up our workshops and training. And this is what brings us here today, talking to Noam and trying to engage our Stanford community with rOpenSci. So if you want to learn more about what Open Source at Stanford is up to or connect with us, please visit our website, opensource.stanford.edu, or email us at opensource-info@stanford.edu. The last reminder that I have is just the codes of conduct for this event. We are governed by the Stanford University Code of Conduct, which is made available online. You can look it up. And our OpenSci also has a code of conduct available online. And with that, I will hand this screen share over to Noam.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's great to be here at Stanford Open Source. Like it's a great office and a great program, and the growth of these open source program offices and communities is, I think, a real great development in open source software academia and research software engineering. And we're very excited to be having an ongoing collaboration with Zach and Francesca and the community that I'm getting to know at Stanford. The title of my talk today is Publishing, Promoting, and Peer Reviewing R Packages. I'm going to go through both something about our community and how people at Stanford can participate in it, and then also get into meat in thinking about how we think about promotion and distribution of academic software. But first, I just want to make sure that we all get to know each other a little better. So hello, everyone. My name's Noam. I'm the executive director of rOpenSci. I've had the pleasure of being in this position for about 2 years now. rOpenSci is now 15 years old. I've been involved for about 12 of them in different ways. I'm a computational disease ecologist. I work in emerging infectious diseases, zoonotic diseases. I work in the reproducibility of software, but also in the forecasting methods related to diseases. And I also work in a variety of other projects in science and public health advocacy. So in addition to my main hat as executive director, I work in an organization called One Health Research Consulting. I'm involved in a nonprofit called Grant Witness, and I do consulting for the CDC Center for Analytics. So I'm a working scientist as well as a cat herder in the open source world. My background is actually I had a first career as a management consultant. I worked in climate and energy related finance and investment actually for a while. Then I returned to science. I went to UC Davis for graduate school. And then I spent 10 years as a scientist at an NGO called EcoHealth, focused on emerging infectious diseases and public health. And over that time, sort of became more and more involved in this computational work, and then ended up switching from doing mostly this and these other projects as opposed to mostly the work there when I took this role on. I'm based in Brooklyn. I'm a huge chauvinist for New York and Brooklyn. I've lived here all my life, with the exception of the 5 years I spent out in your fine state in California when I was in graduate school. So that's just a bit about me. I want us all to get our participation muscles going just a little bit. So I'd love to hear something about who all of you are. And so I hope you can let me know in the chat for this who you are. So just what's your name? What are the general fields people here work on, and how does that work relate to open source and research software? So, just I'd love to see from you. What's your name? Are we grad students, postdocs, librarians, research engineers, faculty, emeritus faculty? Who's coming here, and what's what type of work you do? I won't pause for everybody to do this, but I'm watching the chat, and it'll be good to get a sense uh, for that for everyone. You can also pop it if it doesn't work in the chat. You can put it in the Q&A, and I'll just be watching this as I uh, uh, go on and give you a bit of an outline. So today we're going to be talking about publishing, promoting, and platforms. One part of that is our OpenSci's community and program. We have this new great partnership with the Stanford OSPO. Our OpenSci is a community, much in the at a global scale, much the type that we have at the OSPO and open source in Stanford. And then I want us to talk about the public life of code and how we turn our academic code into academic products and the platforms we use for that and the goals we have for it and how people can accomplish their academic and communication and dissemination goals through different ways of having their software published, peer-reviewed, or distributed out in the internet. So you can use that to advance your research and promote your results and methods and approaches to doing things. Also, this is the first in a series. I'm grateful to be able to be joining you a number of times over the course of this academic year. So today we're talking about publishing, promoting, and peer review. The next session will probably be talking about software peer review as an author or reviewer, how you can have your software reviewed, how you prepare for peer review, and how one does review of other people's software. So how we learn how to do that type of collaboration. And then we're going to have a session talking about long-term open source package maintenance. How do we support the community that supports open source software in the long term? How does one prepare in the planning for software, in the recruitment of contributors and participants, and your turnover in an ongoing way so that your project can live on but isn't an enormous burden on your career at the same time. And so what's the life cycle that we can plan for a software? So those are a couple of other topics that will be exciting to talk about in the future. So we're going to start with an introduction to our OpenSci. Our OpenSci is an organization that aims to foster a culture that values open, collaborative, and reproducible research using shared data and reusable methods. We build technical and social infrastructure in the R language to enable open science in a welcoming and diverse community. So this is our summary. There's a lot packed up in that. So what do we mean by that? We're fundamentally a social organization, right? Like we are trying to build a culture within our own community and within broad communities. And the goal of that culture is to accelerate science by making sure that data is shared in an easier way, that methods are shared in an easier way. We use the mechanism of software and the mechanism of the R language specifically in our work to do that. And then we build an underlying infrastructure to do so. So some of that is technical. We have software platforms, we have software packages, we have forums and other parts of the technical infrastructure that supports the R language, right, and supports that collaboration. And then we have social structure that's like really sort of the glue in communities, the underlying components, be it social media communication, be it forums that we create and events that we create and modes of communication that we foster to enable people to support each other. And this last part, that we do it in a welcoming and diverse community, is a very big part of how we plan that. The diversity, equity, and inclusion component of our work is really core to our values and our success. And we think of that in two ways. One, we want to enable science for its impact, and we want to make sure that impact is available to as many people as possible. And that's our value and that's our goal. And we need the participation of everybody we can and the perspectives of everyone can in order to succeed in that goal. So this is something that's very core to our work, and we want to make sure that we design our community to be as accessible and inclusive to as many people as possible. We have 5 main areas of programs: software peer review, our ecosystem infrastructure, our multilingual programming, training and mentorship, and community events. I'm going to go through those one by one. I'll actually probably give a little short thrift to software peer review because it's such a big part of the rest of what we're going to talk about today. But software peer review is our oldest and biggest program, but not actually the program that we initially thought we were going to have when we created our OpenSci. So software peer review is designed to build the capacity of the developer community and drive adoption of best software engineering practices amongst research software engineers, scientists, people who have a mix of computing and research backgrounds, and to improve the quality, discoverability, and sustainability of our packages that people create, both within and outside our own community. Software peer review has an interesting history in that we didn't start out to be a software peer review organization. We started out to being a software building organization. Our OpenSci fundamentally was an organization that was building tools, particularly for data connectivity in the scientific data repository space. And we just wrote a lot of software packages. And then people started contributing software packages saying, hey, I wrote this package. Maybe it could be an rOpenSci package. And we realized we needed some kind of quality control process. So we slowly developed some standards and an approach for review for what we would take on and how, and our standard for when we would release something we developed. And over time, the collection became less of a focus than the process itself and what we could do with peer review and how it could be a mechanism to connect people together, to change practices, to develop standards, and improve software and community. So now our OpenSci has hundreds of packages contributed by hundreds of authors, and each one of those is an essential product. But the software peer review itself, we found, is as much of a product in the process itself, and we're really proud of that. But it's been really an interesting journey because it wasn't what we initially planned on when we did this. I was brought on as a quality control person in our OpenSci. Could you volunteer to help check out some of our packages? We never realized we would become, uh, essentially this community and editorial process. That said, we still have a lot of big engineering ecosystem components. Our OpenSci is very much plugged into the core infrastructure of the R ecosystem. These days, our flagship project is called R Universe, and we'll get into R Universe a bit more. We think of R Universe as the next generation of technology for our repositories. We'll talk a lot about repositories. R Universe, again, is actually something that we created initially internally and spun outwards. We decided we need a repository for our own packages. We wanted to have a server that would build the documentation to show the documentation for those packages. And as we built more and more automation, more and more publication, more and more components for continuous integration and quality control, we decided let's turn this platform that we used for ourselves outwards. Now, our universe is a place that publication can happen, and it's increasingly becoming the backbone for other parts of the R ecosystem. We do a lot of training and mentorship programs. These have evolved over time. We've had in-person versions of this in our unconferences. We've had mentorship. Our flagship program these days is the rOpenSci Champions program. The rOpenSci Champions program fosters networks of open source leaders and recruits new contributors into the R ecosystem. This is a global program. We have focused on historically underrepresented groups, and we've rotated how we do that. This year, we're running our first all-Spanish program that's focused on participants in Latin America. And the goal here is to find new leaders in groups around the world who are going to promote open science practices where they are and bring them together for training and mentorship, not just in, say, best open science practices, but then also additional things, including event planning and public speaking. So they become good code reviewers and package developers, but also are able to work with each other and their mentors to develop projects and programs where they are. It's a project-based approach. Lots of these people are mid-career professionals in places like statistical agencies internationally. So they're often developing a project that will have a lot of impact. And that brings them into the ecosystem so they become open source contributors. And just as much, people in our community learn about open source projects that they can become contributors to as well. So it's not like we are developing just our own maintainers, we're developing peers so we can have a strong interconnected system. We're really proud of the work's been done in this. This poster I have is the meetup for R in Rosario in Argentina. This is the R meetup group that was started by one of our champions after our program. So now that city has an R meetup that emerged from our OpenSci champions. This is also where a lot of our multilingual work originates. In addition to teaching this program in Spanish, we're increasingly doing work to convert different resources in the R ecosystem, starting with our own guides and books, into multiple languages. And so we have our own work increasingly published in Spanish. We've now just released our development guide in Portuguese as well. And then we've been also building core infrastructure for automating this process. So we have a series of tools that are built around having a AI supported but human editorial process to enable people to build documentation websites in multiple languages, to translate language in Markdown and Quarto books so that you can publish documentation for your software in your languages. You can call an AI API to translate it and then push it to a review for a human editor and trying to push that process out as well. And then really community is our biggest product. So we hold a lot of community events that are designed to bring research software engineers and developers and scientists together in order to form the network, the glue that helps support open source projects. So we have co-working events where people just come together. Lots of people, as I'm sure you're very experienced, might be, say, the only research engineer in the large laboratory, and they're looking for peers that they can spend time to work with. So on the right, this is a group that joined our co-working event. So like we work together for 2 hours and then we take 5-minute breaks. Let's do a scavenger hunt. Go find something like this in the room. Just like help that socialization. Often we'll have a guest at co-working, someone who might want to do a little Q&A. You can have a chatty room and a not chatty room. We have hackathons. Have been a project we've been expanding where people can come with a package they need contributors for and give an introduction to it and get people to sign up for issues, a way of supporting the open source system. We hold community calls and webinars, often people talking about an approach and methods, much like the ones we have here. And then we have a bunch of online fora. We have a public discourse forum. We have a 900 or to 1,000 person strong community Slack. It's semi-open. All you have to do is volunteer for one thing, be it authorship, reviewing, anything like that. And you join it, and you get to be part of that support network of scientists and research engineers. Everyone at rOpenSci is a participant and a contributor. Be you an author, a maintainer, a viewer, if you're a champion of the program, if you're a mentor in those programs, and a lot more. If you want to participate, the best way to do it is we wrote a guide on participating because there's so many different types of programs that we have. So if you go to rOpenSci.org/guides, you'll find the rOpenSci community contributing guide, which really outlines all the ways you can jump in. I'm someone who wants to write software. I'm someone who wants to learn about software. I want to do reviewing. I want to, I want to provide mentorship, right? I'm looking for mentorship. This was written by one of our community managers. And it really tries to, find all the hooks because it's a very big community. We're global, we're multilingual, and it can be tries to navigate. So we just managed to put all of our guides together in one page here, which is that. So I want to take this as a break. I'm going to stop at a few points along the way to ask you questions, which is just a prompt for you to ask me questions one way or other. So you can raise, these are great moments if you want to raise your hand about something we have there. But I'd like to see in the chat of the things we presented, like what parts of that program is interesting to you and what would you like to hear more about? Both in the questions here, I can go into more on any one of those now. And then of course, we're here all year, right? And the real goal of this is to help integrate the Stanford open source community with our OpenSci and our other peers. So if anyone wants to type in the chat of all those things we outlined, what are things that you might be interested in participating in, right? Like what are things that are, the types of things that you're missing or you want to hear more about. We'd love to hear that. So I'll give everybody a good 30 seconds. I'll take a breather and we'll see if we have any questions.
Zach, do you want to jump in with your question?
Well, I want to go last actually. So
Okay.
if any attendees want to go before me, that's probably better. I do have questions, but maybe I can, if people need more time to think, I can warm that up a little bit too. So we're really excited to be working with you, Noam. I know that you've been working on reproducibility of scientific software for many years. I think there's a lot we can benefit from that here at Stanford. Even though there's a lot of excellent work happening, it tends to have lab boundaries, and those expertise don't always jump to neighboring labs, and certainly not across schools. So I think this is, joining, participating in the rOpenSci community is an exciting way to do that. One of our overarching missions in the Center for Open and Reproducible Science is elevating research software to a first-class research object that can be recognized and rewarded, and actually can further someone's career for having written the software part, which doesn't always happen the way that we would hope. So peer review of those, that's something that a lot of people here understand, and people that if somebody's being considered for a promotion or being hired. So that's, I think, a really important marker. My question has to do with where in the overall scholarly communication pipeline that happens, do these reviews tend to take place? Because like if it's a methods article, or if they're announcing a new tool, pre-publication is a time where people might be a little bit more cards close to the vest. And I want to know what you see in terms of the broader ecosystem. Do software packages that go up for review in your process, are those for so longer term projects that there's already been a paper that announces their arrival, or is it for things that are pre-publication? And or what's the relationship with any preprint to full journal article that happens?
Sure. There is a great deal of variety in this. We see things come in for review after publication of in a journal. We see things come in prior. Things tend to work more for people and work better prior,
Hmm.
but it has a trade-off because people have timelines, right? And there's sort of an optimal world in which you sort of do all of these steps in sequence. You get all of the different types of feedback one after the other, right? And then things go out after, you have a peer review and then you have a journal article. But that's often not realistic for people. So I find like it's pretty common that people will have a first version of something that they'll end up publishing, probably like the first like results paper on, and then they'd be like, we really should go back and clean that up some more so we can get it into a methods paper, and that maybe we want to do the software peer review at that point,
Mhm.
right? So we see that happen a lot. Sometimes things come in like well after, and we find that just what happens is people just find that it's much more challenging for them to deal with the feedback. They often have more constraints at that point once they've published and they have like a different, more active user community, and they're frankly have done a whole lot of the work. And there are different options, and I'm going to go through some of those options later on in terms of making sure that you have sort of adequate like metadata and linkage and sort of connection to the academic ecosystem. But different options in peer review may be driven more by like, okay, we want to make sure that we get the uh like the DOI and the marker and the CV, right? But different other forms of review may be much more focused on like, large scale feedback, right? And so we tend to occupy a place where people are like, you tend to have, you've developed something relatively fully, but it's not quite ready out for the world. You're like, okay, like, some people have used it, but we really want to before we get it out there,
Mhm.
we want feedback. And so I'll get into that a little bit.
Is that work embargoed? So like, is there an expectation with the reviewer that this isn't to be shared until there's a publication date, or is there any process around that?
No, we have so we're a fully open process in our organization. So to actually submit, your package has to be open on the web already. That doesn't mean it needs to be in a repository. That doesn't mean it needs to sort of be in a journal. Doesn't mean you have to make a big announcement, but it has to be openly accessible for people to get to. And that's similar to the other software peer review projects that are out there, but it's different than a journal. So part of that is the infrastructure. We rely on sort of a fully open set of infrastructure for people to communicate, and we have an open review process. Um, and part of that is actually that like we don't, one nice thing, there's that option of what goes first and what goes later. And so we are also not a barrier to people getting things out there. You can get things out there and then you can get it. So we generally don't have anything that is private in our system.
Got it.
Um, I do some comments. We had questions about licensing. It's interesting. Uh, I have a short answer for licensing and a long answer for licensing. And I was gonna thinking about whether I wanted to put licensing in uh, to this presentation, and actually left it out partially because as we get to the next part, I want to think with the academic hat on more than the legal hat. It's an interesting thing. I bet you it's pretty rare for people to actually say, what license should I be my paper being published in? It's a little more so people like to have CC BY stuff now, but it's less of a consideration. Um, and my perspective is to use as open a license as possible because most of the um, social, right, and academic and interaction results that you want from publication are not driven by the license, but are driven by lots of other norms and practices in in academic publication, in your outreach, in the way you communicate with people and the audience that you address. And licenses are more likely to get in the way than sort of be facilitators of that. So I tend to be short in being like, let's use everyone I know uses MIT, and that like make sure that an open source package can be used as broadly as possible. And then when you want to start thinking about credit and other things, there's other academic norms and drivers that we tend to use. Now, that's a little different if you like really are aiming to develop something commercial, right? Like, I'm not the right person to ask your question about that, right? The other people probably in the OSPO or your university's IP office, you might think about those, business models. And there's no place like Stanford to ask that question. But I tend to sort of say, like, use the most permissible one that you can, and the easiest one to do that with is often MIT. Um, um, Max's question is what the rest of my presentation is about. So I'm going to get to that. So I'm going to get to that next. And the contributor and developer guide, I'll talk a little bit about I put an extra slide on the developer guide at the end, as well to talk about what we have in there and what you can get from it. So I'll get into that next.
Noam, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah.
I am very curious to hear more about the R Universe platform. I'm uh, very drawn to it. For lack of a better word, it is very cool. And so I'm curious. I was having a conversation with someone who was talking about how to, publicize their project and promote adoption across, researchers at other universities, and also using that as a feedback loop to develop more features for their package. And so I'm curious what impact the R Universe platform has had. If you could talk a bit more about, some success stories that you've seen for individual packages or for the platform as a whole since you started building it and since you've grown it.
I will, and that's part 3, but I will
Perfect.
preview it,
Okay.
right? In the sense that like one of the things that's great about our universe is we think that it really gives you some of the best of both worlds of having the features that are available in these large repositories that have a big social contract associated with them, right? While giving the individual freedom of just working on your own repository. So you get lots of the technical features, right, without some of those requirements. And that means that you can distribute more easily, test more easily, enable others to use it more easily without necessarily signing on for the requirements of some of these other ones. But then it gives you a pipeline to do so. So I'll get a bunch into that more, and then we'll have more Q&A at the end. Great. Okay. We're all here. I'm glad we're getting to know each other better. All right. So, I'm going to back up a little bit and just talk about R packages and software packages conceptually so we can have a discussion about what our aims of what we're trying to do with them. There's a lot of resources, and we'll get into them about sort of like the how of software packages. How do you turn a bunch of code into a package they distribute? We want to talk about what they are and why they are what they are. So as researchers who do computational work, we have code. Code might be in the form of scripts. It might be in a more elaborate structure. And I think of those scripts as both the means and the record of computational research. We have this advantage when we're doing this kind of work, which is different than wet lab work. I was a field ecologist for some time, in that like we have a combination of a thing that is like, this is our explanation of how we do it and how we do it. And we're able to have this reproducible record in ways that are difficult in other parts of the scientific process, right? So we're able to distribute that methodology in the form of the code itself, right? And then in the R language, especially, functions are the minimum reusable units. So you can have the imperative, here's the series of commands I run, and then you can create functions. And functions are things that can be reused exactly the same way, or they can be reused on different sets of data or different conditions. And so within your work, that's the reproducible unit. But then we have packages, and the idea of packages, well, I'm going to take all those reusable units and put them in some sort of organization, right? So we can organize those pieces so that other people can use it, and then add other components such as documentation. And the package adds the other components to make it possible to share. So the package, you add the components to make it possible to move from what's happening in your research on your computer, right, in your laboratory, to someone else who's doing similar work. And they do that with certain components. We add a standard structure to the code, where things go, what folder, what organization, what order they're in. We add documentation so that people can understand what everything is and how to use it. An option to have is you can have tests. They either may be explicit, you may write your own tests, which are basically demonstrations that the package works under certain conditions and guarantees. Some of those tests are inherent to the language because there are built-in tests to make things work. And then you add metadata, all right? Metadata, understanding where this comes from. What else does it depend on? What depends on it? What the license is and what the enabled use. And all of these things enable a set of things that we couldn't do without this organization. We enable reusability. Other people can do what we did. Other people can install it on their computing platforms. You enable interoperability, which means you can bring your package into analysis or work that combines with other packages. So you have namespacing and other means by which you isolate the right parts that enables things to work together, and you have a mechanism to organize so people can have lots of different packages. So all this organization lets you have these pieces. But if we step back, this is what we want to do with our scientific outputs generally. Like, you have software, but we have scientific protocols and scientific papers and descriptions. Those all have a standard structure, be it a publication or a protocol. We have an order of things, be it, a review of literature or methods and results, right? Or standard equipment, standard number of steps. There's inherent documentation to that. They are in many ways all documentation, but they come with supporting data and literature that enable it, and they have metadata. And this is very important in the academic system. The metadata is how you link into credit systems. You have citation, that's your dependency. You have citation the other way, what depends on you. You have your identification, who is the author. That can be linked in formal ways, like with an ORCID of authorship, or a research organization ID, and things like dates and journals. So that metadata helps organize all of that stuff. And that enables your science to be reused and reproduced, enables that science to be interoperable. I'm going to take this method from this paper and take this method from this protocols.io thing, so I can put these things together to design a new experiment. And ultimately, it all fits into a large knowledge organization. And so we think of scientific software as a fundamental academic product in the same way. And when we think about reviewing or publishing packages, we think about similar goals to the scientific goals you might have. So when we think of packages or protocols or methods, right, it needs to meet some criteria. So the first criteria is that it works, right? The most important thing is you have research, right? You have an experiment you want to do. You want to extract and isolate a chemical. You want to make a measurement of animal movement, right? Like, you need something, minimum working requirements for that it works for you. And then as we go out, it needs to meet your needs for sharing and using it. All of us work in labs that, have things that are not published. You have your own sort of bank of methods that you'd like to get out there, right? But they do need at like a first pass of the documentation for the new person coming in the lab, the documentation so you repeat the protocol correctly each time, right? Your safety requirements. So you need a minimum amount for sharing within that, set of collaborators or sub-community. And then when it comes to pushing those out, it's about the norms and expectations of everybody else. Things are very different in neuroscience and to organic chemistry. And there are norms of expectations, which are how we expect people to present these methods for other people to use, how we expect people to present their results. And then those are enforced often by the way we publish our publishing platforms. So broadly, that's journals, though you have other components of that systems, like an institutional review board, right? But it's very much the publishing system that enforces these norms through the publication process and the peer review process that's associated with them. So if you want to push out your results and your methods, it is enforced by this community process, right, which is linked with this infrastructure. And so this is how we think about software. What do we need for it to work for us, to work for our collaborators? And then when we think about our goals, right, what are the expectations of both the people we're going to work with and the platforms we have to do that through? And so if you want to take something that you've done in the form of computer code, especially R code in our case, we want to ask some questions. What's the audience or community that you want to reach? You might be looking for every optical neuroscience who does image analysis, and you want to make sure that they all know what you're doing and how to do it, right? Or maybe you're developing something that's more general than scientific, or maybe you're doing something that is specifically for interacting with Stanford's internal systems, right? And is only relevant for those people, right? We want to know what the norms and expectations are of that community. And then the important thing is, what do you want to get out of that publication? All right. So you have very different platforms depending on, is your main goal feedback and improvement? Do you need recognition, right, within a job situation? Do you need support for your work? Is it going to need to have ongoing maintenance, which you are looking for participant support? Or is the important thing to have visibility, discoverability? Is it going to be around a long time? And there are some trade-offs between this, depending on the platform, but it all comes back to community expectations and goals. And so I take those uh, inputs, right? Thinking about what our community goals and our personal goals are, and say, okay, there are a lot of options out there in the ecosystem for how we publish software. How are they better for each? So, want to take a moment here to get a little input and feedback. We have I've gotten some of this from one answer. I saw someone said they're actively building an R package, but I wonder if people could put in the chat, like, if you've written scientific code, have you put it out in the world, and in what way have you done that, right? So have you published a paper that has a supplement with a script in it, right? Saying this is how I did this analysis. Have you published a package on a platform? Do your labs have some sort of, open source policy? All the code we do goes up on a public sharing platform such as GitHub. So take about 30 seconds. I just love to see where people are in this universe so far. So great. We have two, and we already see that we span this whole spectrum, right, of the type of approaches that people have taken. Do add more, because as I go through these platforms, this will be helpful for discussion uh, in the next. So with this hat in mind, what is our goal for community? I'm going to go through this tour of the R sharing ecosystem, right? About how people publish things at the unit of R packages, and what the different advantages of the different platforms are, and the different processes that you might go through. I'm going to start with platforms. So I'm going to talk about two main processes: the platforms and the peer reviews, right? So we have platforms or repositories, which is the two phrases I'll use interchangeably, which are basically for internet services that host and distribute software packages. So you have a software package that you've written, right? It's available like on the lab server or anywhere else. You can put it up there for the world, right? There are a bunch of things the platforms may or may not do for you. So they provide installation and distribution mechanisms. One component of the R language, it's interpreted, not compiled. So not all of the code needs to be compiled for different systems, but some of it does. So some platforms provide the ability to compile codes that can be used on lots of different type of computing platforms. Some of the platforms provide quality control and review because they have a curation or gatekeeping process. They have a set of standards of what they allow on, right? Maybe in the standards of quality of documentation, completeness, making sure that it passes tests, or if it's interoperable with other things on that platform. Some platforms provide long-term archival, some don't. Academics and researchers tend to be uh, more interested in sort of the extended long-term reproducibility of their work than, say, lots of software developers, because things tend to have a lot more turnover, but we are concerned about the longevity of research that might be decades old, right? And then the platforms have a large mix of features when it comes to the testing of packages, right? Providing that testing, supporting the documentation of that package, and supporting discoverability. I break these into two main groups. You have platforms that are large-scale communities. We have CRAN, which many people are familiar with, Bioconductor, and R multiverse. These are large scale, and we call them communities because it's not just a place to put your package, but it requires you to interoperate with lots of other packages as well. And there are lots of advantages to the visibility of these, right? And they have the additional challenge of there being a social contract for ongoing maintenance of those and interoperability with the other packages. And then you have individualized repositories. You don't necessarily need to go on to CRAN or Bioconductor or Multiverse, depending on what your goals for the package are. And the individualized repositories can give you a mix of different types of features you might be interested in for your scientific goals, right? But they may not have the visibility than these large-scale communities. CRAN, the Comprehensive R Archive Network, is the original and most widely used R package repository. And probably, I would guess 80% of you, right? Probably more, as this is the primary and maybe only one you use because it's the default. If you install R, you install things from CRAN. When you type install packages, pulls down packages from CRAN. CRAN is extremely long-lived, extremely stable, right? It's been around for decades at this point. It operates as a collection of university-based servers around the world. And it provides binary installable packages for all the major platforms. So if you submit your package to CRAN, you are able to install it on Windows, Linux, some odd flavors of Unix that are specific to research conditions and Mac systems. And they enforced a base level, but a very strict level of quality standards on packages. There's a standard set of tests for what goes on CRAN, and you absolutely must pass them 100%. That strictness can be challenging because it's not always as fully documented as people like. And it does entail a real ongoing maintenance commitment because packages on CRAN are constantly turning over. And if a package either depends on yours and yours breaks it, it is part of your social contract to fix that conflict. And if there are updates to R, the breaker package, it's a social contract for you to maintain it. Things can come off of CRAN, but there's really an expectation that things will be there long term. CRAN actually, it has been very bare bones, but they've actually increased the features that may be important to people from a discoverability or an accessibility perspective. So if you publish on CRAN, it now has features that link by creating digital object identifiers. So like you can cite something with a DOI straight off of CRAN. It links to the ORCID system, so you can connect to that component of your scholarly work. The documentation is much better. In the past year, they've started making accessible web-based documentation for packages, not just sort of the harder to deal with PDFs, which makes things a little easier to search. So it's very old school in a lot of ways, but it's actually been neat. They've been making improvements really in the past couple of years that enable more things that we expect in more modern systems. Bioconductor is also a widely used and large-scale community repository. It's actually more tightly integrated than CRAN in the sense that there are requirements for interoperability between packages based on the idea that there should be common data structures, say, for handling genomic data, right? And Bioconductor has a little bit of a model in which they expect basically someone to be able to install everything on Bioconductor at once and have that whole set of tools available. It has some parallels, say, in the Python ecosystem to SciPy, in that, like, let's have all of Bioconductor available at once. And so it has a little bit of a different interoperability model, a little bit of a different release model, unlike CRAN, which sort of continuously is changing at all times. It's more stable. And so from a developer's perspective, you know you only need to make updates every 6 months if something comes along. And they also do other things that are important to the bioinformatics community. So they host data sets, they host tutorials, and Bioconductor is actually a really active community. Bioconductor holds global events all year. There's Bioconductor Europe and Bioconductor North America and Bioconductor South America, right? You have conferences and presentations. Like, so it's an active community of bioinformatics researchers like jointly participating in this project. And so you can go give a methods talk at Bioconductor and then stay for the hackathon day afterwards. And it has an opportunity to connect with community, which is something that, we really think of as important as part of it. So if that's the place you work in, it has some real benefits. There's a new kid on the block, our multiverse, which has come out of the pharmaceutical industry with a particular focus both on the developer experience and the idea of production readiness. So this has come from people in commercial and pharmaceutical spaces who wanted a model that was more based around other commercial uh, software languages, right, to get a certain degree of stability in the release cycle. And so our multiverse is basically designed that if you have a package on GitHub, all you have to do is send them the link to it, right? And then you can automate the whole process of release. So it's a very easy developer experience. And then they have fixed quarterly releases and say everything, available as of this quarter, everything available as of this quarter. And they have a very low barrier to entry in terms of the quality checks. You have to meet the same automatic testing as CRAN, but besides that, they just check that you have an appropriate license and that you aren't firing any security red flags in terms of your dependencies. They set that up as having basically, there's a community repository that people can always contribute to, and then they check that everything works quarterly, and you get the quarterly release. It's an interesting model. They work closely with our universe platform as the back end for it. And so it's an interesting new place that we're seeing some of the pharmaceutical industry start using as their home, and also other things that just don't work on other platforms, packages that are multilingual and don't say work on CRAN because they need dependencies that CRAN can support. So those are the big places, right? But perhaps your goal is not as large scale or is not yet as large scale of going to one of these larger repositories. And so there are places we can work at a smaller scale with a different audience. The base case, for a lot of people is GitHub. And I also want to make sure that we mention that GitHub is not the only option of where to host version controlled code. Git can be hosted in places like Codeberg and GitLab. Certainly these days in an international community, people are interested in a lot of options outside the US. Codeberg is German. GitLab lets people self-host on their own servers, and there are other options like that as well. But if you are developing code on one of these platforms, the main point is that there's no maintenance burden to it. So you may want to share your code, but that doesn't necessarily mean you want to sign up for long-term maintenance. And so you can share code directly from one of these platforms. You don't have to pass any tests to do it, right? But then you might not get some things. You don't get long-term archival necessarily. GitHub is very, very stable, right? But there are no guarantees on it. And discovery is not as complete. You also can have installation hurdles because GitHub or GitLab doesn't necessarily build for all the platforms that you want. It doesn't build automatically. You'd have to set it up yourself for it to do that. But you have all of these collaboration and social features and all of these coding features. You've got your built-in, GitHub Copilot if you're someone who's using that. Like, this is a building platform, but it's a sharing platform. And so, depending on your goals, you can stop here, right? You don't need to do more than that, right? Another point of connection to the scholarly ecosystem has less to do with testing, but has to do with the scholarly record and archival. So Zenodo is one of several long-term data platforms. It's run out of Europe, the CERN laboratory, that is for storage of scientific data, but also scientific code. And it is a great option if you want to publish your software in a way that is like makes it a matter of record without necessarily having that testing. So you can connect your GitHub repository to Zenodo and say, when I push this button to release, we're going to archive this. It's going to get a DOI. It's going to have a scholarly citation. It will always keep that specific copy for me, even if it's deleted elsewhere. And it can be part of the scientific record, so I can put it out as a supplement for my paper, for instance. So you can connect your software to the academic ecosystem in this way if you're not looking for feedback and testing, but you need to make sure that you have a rock solid record. And they make it very easy with this GitHub connection, but you don't have to do that. rOpenSci has some tools specifically for connecting things up with Zenodo from either other repositories or your local computer. So I have a bunch of packages that are like this, and at the end of a paper, I just reference that Zenodo repository, so I know even if I were to delete it off GitHub somebody else would, or that service goes down. Zenodo is long term. They have a century based plan. Um, they've needed so much petabyte storage at CERN in Europe that they realized that they could store all of this data and have a really rock solid scientific archival process. There's also a group, Software Heritage. It's a little less focused on sort of the academic perspective, but more focused on other long-term software challenges, that does have a thing called the Antarctic Code Vault, that does other long-term storage. It's a little less connected in that the metadata is not as well integrated with the academic process, but it's also really interesting, and is another long-term option. And then I'll mention rUniverse. So rUniverse is our infrastructure for our code, and it provides the features that most of the repositories like Bioconductor and CRAN do. And it is actually the backend for Multiverse, and it is actually increasingly the backend for Bioconductor. We have a new partnership of merging Bioconductor's operations, which had previously all been on site at Boston Hospital, to cloud-based builds that we are jointly building. And so rUniverse and Bioconductor now have joint builds. And rUniverse is great not just for publishing a package, but for publishing collections of packages, because we call it a meta repository, in that you can create your own repository for whatever collection of packages you want, for whatever set of standards you want. That's what Multiverse did. They set up a set of standards, right, and then built a universe package on top of it. And we build for all of the major platforms. We're also the first project to start building for WebAssembly, so you can compile all of your code to WebAssembly. And we're always building more testing, automatic documentation building. We're soon going to have automatic web-based demos of your example code on there as well. And it can also integrate with GitHub or any other Git platform that you can simply point your rUniverse setup to it, and it will build all the packages under your GitHub or Codeberg namespace. And you get a nice display of all the packages. It'll also show information about authorship, who are the major contributors. It'll generate your documentation in accessible web form or PDF form. We're always expanding this, and it's become a great place for groups to use as their main development hub. So the Stan group that does Bayesian modeling, rUniverse is their primary platform. The Polars group that does a bunch of Rust work, right, for rUniverse is their main platform. And then there's this group. So GGSeg is a group of Norwegian neuroscientists who build these brain atlases. And they have this whole series of packages for segmentation and visualization. Those are the platforms. And so that's a way you can get your packages out, how you can have these features. And then there's a question of how else we want to treat our code like an academic product, in terms of socializing with the community to increase your visibility and credit that you get, to improve the quality of your code, to make sure it's published in the target of your academic community, and other ways we can link it to the academic system. And so if you want your code to be treated like a manuscript in terms of the scale of its sort of academic credit, there are a lot of different options. And it's interesting because they range from things that are very much just sort of like the platforms to things that are very much like traditional scientific journals. So I put these in two buckets, right? Though it's really quite a continuum. So you have the things that are really more like software platforms. and that is the Journal of Open Source Software, or rOpenSci peer review, which are peer review systems, but are really built with software as its infrastructure that it goes through. And then you have things that are near that, but are much more journal-like, in which the product is more the description of the software than the software itself, right? And then there's a range of ways that software might be treated and how your review might be in the process. The Journal of Open Source Software is neat. It was actually started by a guy who was working at GitHub, Arfon Smith, on their science team. And he had this question of what is the minimal thing you could do to take what is already an academic product and get it connected to the systems of credit and CVs and academic reputation, essentially, given all the work that has gone into it, right? And in some ways designed to be really minimal. So the Journal of Open Source Software reviews your software, and its scope is any scientific software in any language, right? So very broad. And while it's a journal and it hooks into the journal system, all you need is a single page of software description, which is just a markdown file in your repository to publish in JOS. And they have lots of automation in that system. So if you put a markdown file in your repository, they make a very nice, printed document that is a published journal. You get DOI, you get Crossref, and I think they're going to be being relisted in the Web of Science credit and all of this. And like you've got a publication. We'll go on to this other thing. We also link with them, so they're not exclusive. You can go through a different peer review system and get published in the Journal of Open Source Software. So it's really neat. You do have your software directly reviewed. You'll get two people reviewing the software, giving their opinions on it. But because of its very broad scope, they don't have a lot of specific standards. They're really high-level things where they ask people to evaluate, is this documented? Is it well structured? Does it meet the performance characteristics that are described? And people review that, but it's very broad because they handle R and Python and Ruby and Fortran and everything in between.
No, could I raise
Yeah.
a question that
Yeah.
was brought to us in the chat, and I think
Yeah.
relevant to your point about academic credit? The question is, do you recommend publishing to both Zenodo and GitHub for academic projects? And is this because of the DOI that you have minted with Zenodo, and or how this may also link to DOIs minted by JOS?
So this is interesting. So people typically do both, or rather, right? Like GitHub is the development platform, and then Zenodo is the archival platform, right? Once you publish to Zenodo, you can't delete it. That's the contract, sort of the social contract of it. When you deposit, you can't delete it. The DOI is as permanent as something can be in the internet connected world. Essentially. And a bunch of additional metadata is required and hooked up so it can connect with the academic system, right? Something can be pulled down off of GitHub, even if you can change the version history in GitHub. It has none of those guarantees. So it's generally thought of as that's the location of record, right? So you can always pull something down from GitHub and use it, even though it won't necessarily have all of the nice social and user interaction features that you have on GitHub. So, it's interesting. There's this weird thing people think about, like something is not, they say it's citable when it has a DOI, and it's helpful, but that's not true. You can cite personal correspondence and all kinds of things, but it certainly helps the system to have it. So the DOI is like an important identifier, but it's more that this is as good of a guarantee that the thing that was published is the thing that we want, right? And that's the reason for it. And that's why we generally do two different things and why GitHub and Zenodo play two different roles. We have another question here, which is about sharing code with reviewers, which is not yet public. This is really interesting, right? I think one of the great values of GitHub is actually the ability to do private coding in the exact same platform that you would do public coding, which means that there's like a low barrier because you can just like do things privately, and at a certain point, you want it to be public, and all you have to do is to flip a switch, and there's not like a whole lot of effort to move it from the private to the public sphere. You can do things privately in GitHub, but not anonymously. rOpenSci and PyOpenSci have non-anonymous systems. We have non-blinded approaches. It's all done publicly, and reviewers, right, know who it is, and you're required to be public in the first place. There are a couple of specific platforms designed to anonymize GitHub repositories. So you can submit something, right, and it will erase all the metadata and present an unidentified I have to remember what the name of it is, a non-GitHub, which is specifically designed so that you can share a private GitHub repository with a reviewer. It'll give you a private link. You can also deposit something to Zenodo as metadata only with release. So you can put a deposit in, and then someone can request access. And so that's another thing you can do. You can provide an access code to something that is deposited to Zenodo. In that case, you can't use the GitHub automation. The GitHub automation requires a public thing, but you can just upload. So that's another thing you can do. It's designed because Zenodo also lets you deposit sensitive medical data that would be available to share, but shouldn't be shared to everybody. And so you have those things. So that's another way you can do it. That said, if it's private and you're just sharing it with the reviewers, you can zip the thing up and put it as an attachment in publication, right? You don't necessarily have to go through those systems. But you can either but if sometimes there's just like a requirement, you might even have something public already, but the journal wants it anonymized, and so that a non-GitHub is useful for that. I will note in the software publication space that it is beginning to have the challenges of a bunch of other scientific publication. Perhaps this is more aggressive than some would describe this, but there's a journal called Software X that I think of as you get not everything you get with JOS, but you get to pay $1,500. Right? JOS is completely free. rOpenSci is completely free. Software X is an Elsevier journal, right? Designed to scratch that itch of having that minimal thing. They're we only require 500-word papers as a descriptor of software, but there are no standards for reviewing the software itself. In fact, there's not even a requirement that reviewers review software itself. They just review that short paper. So you're not getting software review, right? So this is a low barrier to entry software cash harvest, essentially. Arfon Smith, who runs JOS, will every once in a while put out a blog post of how they managed to do everything at a cost of, a few of thousands of dollars a year, dollars per paper. There's no reason this should be $1,500, but these are out there, and I'm sure there's only going to be more of them. So I think that's just something people should be aware of, and we have these challenges all over the scholarly system. Then I'll get to us. I'm not going to, I saved it for last so I wouldn't go into rOpenSci too much. We'll have a whole session on rOpenSci peer review. But the features that are different from, say, rOpenSci peer review from, say, JOS peer review is it is frankly a much more in-depth process. We focus specifically on R packages because we have expertise and community in R packages, which means we have built a whole series of standards and tests and automation built around how we can improve our packages. So we have higher testing requirements than most of the platforms, right? We have a chat bot that will give you feedback on your package as to whether it's meeting those standards when you submit it, right? But we have a really fantastic and committed community of reviewers from sort of academic to industry that we can probably find somebody who uses both the object-oriented package you decide as your infrastructure and is also someone who researches bird songs, right, to review your package. That's the promise we try to keep, is that we have committed and expert reviewers for everyone, and that we build all of this additional infrastructure on top of it. So submitting to rOpenSci is a higher standard than a lot of these other places, but then it's also a linkage directly to community. So if you're peer reviewed on rOpenSci, you become part of our maintainer community, which means you can become part of the chat room. You get our software maintainer updates. We check in with people with period, like, do we need help with recruiting new maintainers? Are there things in the ecosystem coming down the pipe that all of our maintainers need to know? And it's linked. We have, the R Universe, our OpenSci platform. So your documentation is built on our website and a series of things. But most importantly, people actually really do love the review because they get a lot of great feedback. And consistently, when we survey our authors, they say the main reason people submit is they like the feedback that they are getting more than the credit. That said, our OpenSci links with JOS. So if you pass our OpenSci review, JOS will accept you based on our OpenSci's reviews. So you get that sort of, that plugin, you get your DOI, it's out there. OpenSci does the same thing. The JOS editors will look, you've got good rOpenSci reviews. All we have to do is look at the paper is formatted correctly, and off it goes. And so that ecosystem is very beneficial. Now, when you're thinking about your goals, though, these are software audience things, and it's often important to publish in things that are specific to your field. rOpenSci for a number of years actually had a partnership with Methods in Ecology and Evolution, because there are a lot of ecologists who are the founders of rOpenSci, where people could get a badge on a methods paper that they published in MEE because it was a peer-reviewed software. But lots of people who publish do this both ways. So they publish the software package in a software-specific venue, such as JOS or rOpenSci, and then they publish a descriptor, a tutorial, or a descriptor of the methods in their field-specific areas, be it, psychology or whatever else they're doing, right? This is where the tutorial goes, right? This is where the description of the algorithm that we developed, that we packaged around in the software goes. This is how we show an application of it. And, this is something you can think of these as complementary. And then sometimes places like MEE or some of these other places do have a specific format called like a software note, right? Which is often like a 1,000, 1,500 word article specifically about announcing the tool and the method. The challenge is that you have a big mix of what type of review you might get. If I'm your reviewer, you're going to get a review of the software, right? Other people might only really be reviewing the descriptor, but it's an important complement to this work. And then the other place we have is the R journals themselves. So they're really two journals that are journals about R. Journal of Statistical Software and the R Journal. Journal of Statistical Software has published things that are not R, but it's like 90% R. And this is specifically both about computer science or statistical methods, right? And these are journal articles that you are submitting a manuscript that is a descriptor of the software, but all of the reviewers in this space are people who review the software themselves. They don't necessarily have sort of the standard structure that JOS and rOpenSci do, but they have these experienced reviewers, and then they often have some other features that just make sense for someone who's a developer. So you can submit your manuscript in Quarto or R Markdown for these, and they're automatically built, and so they're a little more developer friendly. But you're addressing, in this case, the language community. So it's a question as to whether your developers are your audience or something else. And I want to emphasize in this that, like, a lot of times none of these are exclusive. And on one hand, you don't necessarily want to overdo sort of the academic stacking, but each of these repositories and these publications have a role in your scientific sharing process, depending on what your goals are for the methods that you are putting out. So GitHub might be used in development or your initial sharing process. Zenodo archives. Universe lets you develop sort of like working versions for sharing and collections. And then you can get more visibility by going through rOpenSci and JOS, more feedback from a broader community from rOpenSci or JOS or some of the other journals. And then CRAN, Bioconductor, and R Multiverses are places to distribute to make sure as many people get it. So you could sort of go through these as a ladder, but as I said in the beginning, these aren't necessarily exclusive in order as well. So you can get things to CRAN and then have them peer reviewed. You can decide that when you publish a paper, even if you have the thing out elsewhere, let's put this version on Zenodo for its long-term posterity, right? And there might be an update that needs to be published in a journal. So there can be all kinds of combinations.
And before we get to
Uh-huh.
the question Zach raised, I think a really important point in the chat about double dipping, which is a question that we've gotten when we've also talked to members of our community about publishing their science and publishing their software. Zach.
Yeah, so I just wanted to underscore what Noam just said, actually, in that lots of times these decisions are driven by the PI. They may or may not be a member of our community at the Center for Open and Reproducible Science, where some of these norms are set, and they may have their own opinions. We've been asked sometimes, like, but is it double dipping to deposit your data, get a DOI for it, and then deposit your software here and get a DOI for that? And then it's like it absolutely is not double dipping. We want you to do all of those things. And your professional societies are saying the same thing. So if you go to your academic conference, you'll find that that those norms are being set there as well, and it is all very complementary, as Noam says. So please do get that DOI for your software. It helps us count it.
Yeah, and part of that is just that, like, increasingly there are better platforms for different components of the process, right? So there are places that are better for data, and there are places better for software, and there are places better for the narrative that surrounds it. And they all can work together as sort of like a linked network of objects, right? This can be overdone, and I'm sure people do overdo it. But that there is a separate record of a preprint, a publication, the software, and the data is very much the norm these days. So we have a little bit of time left. I'm curious what other questions people have about the I can get back to some of the ones that we covered already. Or what else you're interested in sort of across this spectrum of uh, academic software publication options.
We did have some people that had to drop off, unfortunately. Some of our, like Mika had to go, one of our more passionate interlocutors on these topics. Um, and again, I'll give some people some time to think. Um, from from my work at the center and the OSPO, one of the things that we're trying for is from the credit side. So a lot of the researchers, they're interested in rigor and quality. But from a administrative side, we want to be able to recognize people that care about that for all the work that they're doing to create more reproducible software. Um, so, um, one of the things that we run up against is that the practice of software citation in articles is still pretty abysmal in terms of adoption rate. And what you were saying earlier got me thinking about the metadata that ex already exist in our packages, specifically dependents. And so, like, I'm wondering if we could query any of the platforms you're talking about later to come up with a much better sense of the impact of software.
So there is a project called CodeMeta, right, that was actually created by one of our OpenSci founders, Carl Bettinger. And it's interesting. It was adopted by Software Heritage. And basically, it's a standard for software metadata that is also like an interchange format between the description in our package and the package.json for a node package and all of these different the requirements.txt, right? Um, to describe those interconnections, and also has the ability to say, metadata, this is peer reviewed in this way, which also now exists in the R description file. You can put in the R description file the reviewer, and you'll find there are a bunch of packages on CRAN that says reviewed by this person at rOpenSci.
That's cool.
It's interesting. So we used to just actually require that people put it in their packages, but now it's sort of this interop. It's just sort of a factor. So Software Heritage probably actually has a lot more of this sort of linkage data.
Hmm.
but that's sort of impact in that one software cites another software in that it's a description. The citation with the academic literature is, as we know, much, much worse. And there's been a series of projects. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative have been very central in this over the years, where they've tried to use the big machine learning natural language approaches to try to quantify that. So there's a project called Ecosystems right now that actually is a public repository. And our universe actually uses this. So if you go to our universe, your ecosystem citation metrics are on the package page, right? We also have a metric that we've created, which is the number of times your package is called across all of GitHub. So we do a query into GitHub and we get the number of, for R, the number of library or require calls of your package across GitHub. And so we have these additional series of metrics, though it remains very fuzzy. And I feel like the citation from a matter of like having the right record is important, but I think my personal feeling is that, from like an automated aggregate metric point of view, this is really going to work when it's no longer a human effort to put them in. I think that's the lesson of the past 20 years of this approach. There was this question, and I did describe that about the Journal of Statistical Software and the Journal of Open Source Software, which are confusing. They do sound alike. They're pretty different. Journal of Statistical Software really is about statistics, and that's why it's very much an R place. And it is a place that people publish a description of a new statistical method package that they have, but also occasionally, like this is an article about update like a new graphical system, right, for making plots, for instance. And so it is focused on the things that people do in R, essentially. And it is a journal about articles. So someone will review the software, but you write a manuscript that is about what you do. And a lot of times, Journal of Statistical Software articles also are the vignette in the R package. So we'll see a lot of R packages where the vignette is the same thing that is the JSS article. It's the LaTeX article that they put there. Journal of Open Source Software is just much broader. Any language, much broader set of topics, and it doesn't require anything but that one-page descriptor. And it's very much the point here is to review your software and make the software an object, as opposed to create a descriptor of that software and an introduction or explanation for people of it.
And I know we are at time now, but before we let everyone go, I want to just thank you, Noam, for this very, very informative overview of our OpenSci and the entire R ecosystem. How can people get in touch with you? How can people get involved? What's a good next step for our audience here?
I mean, rOpenSci.org is certainly the place to start. And you stick on the top, it says guides, and that'll get you to like the introductions, the guide for someone asked about our development guide. That's the one other slide I had. If you are writing packages, we think of two big resources in this world. There's the one that our packages is developed by Hadley Wickham and the team at Posit. And then we have what we call the developer guide, which is really the amalgamation of all of our sort of knowledge about this process. Right. That's up in our guides page as well. And so you get there, that'll be, our OpenSci guides is where you'll find the connection to the community. You'll also see on the page we have our events, right, and our blog. I'm very easy to find. I think Blue Sky is my main platform of connection these days, but as far as I know, there's only one other Noam Ross in the world. And he lives in Haifa and is some kind of engineer, but is not in any of these spaces. So Noam Ross, I'm easy to find across all of the things. I'm Noam Ross at
Perfect.
GitHub, Blue Sky, everything else.
Well, thank you. And like Noam said earlier, this is just the first of a series of offerings that Open Source at Stanford and our OpenSci are going to provide for the community. So we hope to see you at our future events and, of course, engage with our OpenSci at their community events as well. So thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Noam, for your presentation.